Good morning, everybody. It's time for us to turn off any distractions, to sit still, and to be quiet for a few moments as we gather for our school assembly today. Our school value for this term is endurance. I want you to take a moment to think about what that word means. What do you understand by endurance? We say that running a marathon is a test of human endurance. For some people, this lockdown will be testing their endurance. So what is endurance? To have endurance means to have the ability to keep doing something that is difficult, unpleasant, or painful for a long time. This is Job. Job is a good man. He's wealthy, but not boastful or selfish. And he worshipped God and obeyed all of God's laws, and he loved God. One day Satan, who is the great accuser, came to God and said, "It's easy for Job to be good when things are going well. I bet if life got hard, he would change." And so God agreed that Satan could test Job's faith. One day shortly after this, a messenger came to Job to tell him that all of his cattle had been stolen. Then another servant came to tell him that all of his sheep had been killed. And then a third servant came with the worst news of all, that all of Job's children had been killed. Job tore his clothes and cut his hair and sank to the ground. And he said, "Everything I have was given by God, and what he has given he can take away, and still I praise his name." Job had passed the first test. Satan went back to God and said, "It's all very well, but it would be a different story if Job suffered himself." And so God agreed to allow Satan to test him a second time. The next day Job woke up and he was covered in boils. They stung and they itched so much that all he could do was sit in a corner with a piece of broken pottery and scrape his skin. Job's wife came to him and asked, "Why aren't you cursing God?" But Job replied, "If we take the good things from God, shouldn't we also take the bad?" Job's friends came to see him, and they asked him, "What bad thing have you done? For you must have done something awful for God to do this to you." His friends were trying to help, but they only made things worse. Job knew that he hadn't done anything wrong, but their words troubled him, and at last, out of frustration, he cried out to God, "Oh God, what have I done to make you so angry with me? How can you do this to me?" But another one of Job's friends, a young man, came to see him. He said, "I've kept quiet until now because I am younger and I thought you were wiser. But how could you say these things about God? You have no right to criticize God. Think of how great and powerful God is. You cannot begin to understand his ways." And then a storm began, with thick cloud and lightning, and out of the storm came a voice. God said to Job, "How could you question me? Were you there when I made the world? Are you able to make the rain fall out of the sky and onto the ground? You questioned my wisdom. And Job was ashamed. He said, "O Lord, forgive me. I have acted foolishly." God was pleased with Job. God blessed him, healed him, and Job lived many, many more years in the presence of God, praising and following the law. There are two really important lessons I'd like us to learn from Job. The first is about endurance. That when difficult things in life happen, when people die or when people become ill, when we lose things that are precious to us, that we can get through it. That we can, if we keep our faith, come through it and even be blessed. That life is never as bad as we think it is. The second is that there is nothing that we can't take to God. Job was blessed in the end because of his faith. Because even in the difficult times, he wasn't afraid to question God. And there's a really strong practice in Christianity of taking our complaints to God. And this is called lament. When we lament, we take all those bad things that have happened and we ask God why. There are loads of stories and songs and poems about lament, particularly in the Old Testament, when God's people suffered and went through hardships. Never be afraid to tell God all that happens to you and everything that you're feeling. I wonder, what have you been too afraid to tell him? What's on your heart today that you would like to say? Dear God, thank you for creating all of us and making us one family. Help us to grow and learn together so we can show your love in the world. Amen.